I'm Katie from Romance Gardens. Today we are talking about all things bulbs. So here at Romance Gardens we carry a lot of different bulbs, and all of these are bulbs that you plant in the fall so that you get nice early and beautiful blooms in the spring. Many of the common ones that you're going to know about are going to be things like tulips, we have daffodils, and all sorts of fun things. Today what I wanted to do is go through just a few kind of tips and tricks and things that I like to do with bulbs to get more bang for my buck. So let's start with some of the basics. This year in my garden, I am kind of doing this orange and yellow theme. So the first thing you want to do is you want to think about the colors and the schemes that you're shooting for. Now remember, this is next spring, so you don't want to think about what you're doing this year if you decide you want to change it up. So many of the bulbs that you're familiar with will be things like tulips and daffodils, as I said earlier. But one of my favorites this year is I'm going to be working with some oranges and some yellows. So I have a Bourbon Street tulip, which is a beautiful warm orange tulip, and then I have Beauty of Appledorn, which basically is a bright yellow tulip, and then it almost looks like somebody took a paintbrush and edged it in this beautiful orange. Now when you're looking at your bulbs, you want to look and see what time they bloom, which will usually be on the package. It'll tell you a few other things, like this one's bee friendly, which means it probably puts out some nice pollen and has a good fragrance. It's also going to tell you what the height of the bulb is. So this particular tulip is a little bit taller. It's going to get 20 to 25 inches tall. And then my Bourbon Street is a little bit shorter, and that's going to get 14 to 16 inches tall. Now, one thing about planting bulbs, and this will go to all of the different bulbs, is you want to make sure that you're planting them deep enough. Now here in Michigan, we like to plant our tulips a little bit deeper just because of our harsh winters and making sure that this bulb makes it through the winter. But a good rule of thumb is if this is the ground, I always want to take the bulb and I take the height of the bulb and I want to go 3 times down. So again, that's going to get you anywhere from 6 to 8 inches on the average size bulb, and for tulips I tend to go a little bit different. Now one tip I'm going to tell you on tulips is your tulips will have sort of a flat side, and it'll also have like a little booty side. So when you're planting, I like to do all of my bulbs in clumps. So when you're planting, you're going to end up digging a hole and you're going to go down anywhere from 6 to 8 inches deep. And what I find with tulips is you take the flat stomach side, and that's all going to face toward the center of the hole. So if you can imagine me dropping this into my hole in the ground, I would take all of my flat sides and I would have them facing the center of the hole. And that's a really great way, because the way it comes out of the bulb, they actually come together and kind of hold on to each other. So you get that really strong bouquet look. So again, with tulips, don't be afraid to mix your clumps, but just definitely look at when they are blooming and how tall they're going to be, because that's how you would plant the bulb. So if I'm going to be planting a 20 to 25 inch bulb with a 14 to 16 inch bulb, in the center is where I'm going to put the taller bulb with a bit of the shorter bulbs around it, and that's going to give me almost a vase-like bouquet of pretty bulbs. So again, don't be afraid to work with the tulips. Don't be afraid to play with, you can see that there's so many different colors, so many different bloom times. Most tulips will bloom either early spring, which is going to be about the end of March in our area, to about the middle of April. Then there's mid-spring, which is usually the good month of April. And then there's late spring. Late spring will usually take you from about the middle of April to the beginning of May. But again, all of this is sort of weather dependent on when we warm up, how cold we stay, ups and downs and things like that. On average, your tulip will last anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So one thing about when we talk about issues with rodents and deer and things like that, many of the daffodils, hyacinths, and a lot of those bulbs, allium especially, they are not prone to be eaten by deer or dug up by squirrels, which is really great. Unfortunately, a lot of the firmer bulbs, like the tulips, are what the squirrels are going to go to. So one little trick that I do is I like to plant my bulbs, and again, I want to go a little bit deeper, and then I'll usually put a couple inches of soil on them, and then I will do a nice layer of just inexpensive gravel. Anything that squirrel's actually going to hit, and he's like, well, this isn't any fun. So again, a good little layer of gravel in between that sometimes will help you keep the squirrels from going all the way in. Don't be worried, because the point of the tulip will come right through that gravel and come out like normal. But again, that's going to stop your squirrel from getting as excited as he usually does when he sees a nice bulb. Now we have things like daffodils. Now daffodils are a really great bulb to plant, not only because they give you early spring color when we need it the most, but they also tend to naturalize. And what that means is they are going to perennialize or spread and come back year to year. With most of my tulips, they're only lasting an average of maybe 2 to 3 years, and then they kind of start to weaken out. Most of the Darwins I find to be a heftier tulip, and they sometimes will go a little longer for me, so you can definitely look for that variety if you're looking for longevity. One of the reasons I don't care on tulips is because I change my color scheme every year, so I tend to pull them out and change them every few years. But when it comes to daffodils, you're gonna be looking at daffodils here, and the most classic one is gonna be your Dutch Master. So with daffodils, you're gonna see that the main thing you want to look at is you have bulbs. Now bulbs are snotty, noses are always up in the air. So just remember that whenever you see a bulb, you want to make sure you're looking for the nose of the bulb to plant the bottom of the root. So bulbs you can see, as we said, noses in the air. And a lot of these bulbs you can tell because you get this little root coming out of the base of the bulb. Other times it can be a little trickier. Sometimes with tulips you don't quite notice. If you're ever not sure, plant the bulb on its side. That will ensure that it can come up, because we're trying to avoid planting it upside down where it has to do a whole lot more work to come up and about. So again, look to make sure that you're putting your noses up in the air. Now daffodils, basically, also I like to give my daffodils just a little bit of a squeeze. They should be pretty firm. Every once in a while you'll have a little softening, and that's okay. On tulips, I want to make sure that they're always quite firm. With daffodils, again, you want to go 3 times the height of the bulb down. And with daffodils, I always like to go minimum clumps of 5. That's my personal choice because I feel like that gives you a good setting. That way you can kind of dig a hole with a shovel 6 to 8 inches deep, place your 5 daffodils, 1 in the center with 4 around it. That's going to give you a very large, nice clump. Now with daffodils, every point is going to be a flower. So as the bulb spreads, it basically adds little, I call them bulbettes. That's probably not the professional word, but it works for me. It has little bulbettes that will come out, and each one of those will add flowers. So again, this bulb is a naturalizing bulb, which means it slowly spreads. Anytime I plant bulbs in a clump, I want to make sure they have a little space. I don't want the bulbs touching each other. That's when you tend to get some rot. But again, with daffodils, you've got your Dutch Master, which is a very classic. It's one of the most common ones you see, and it's used to be called King Alfred, if you're familiar with that name. But again, deer resistant with all daffodils, so deer won't usually eat them because they have a little toxin in their stem. So it's a great naturalizing plant for the garden. Some of my favorites are going to be this one, which is called Thalia. Thalia is a beautiful cream. It's a little smaller daffodil. It's only going to get about 10 to 12 inches tall, so it'd be a little comparable to the classic Tate that everyone sees. But again, what's wonderful about Thalia is it's super, super fragrant. I mean, it smells amazing. And again, sometimes I just like that softer color as everything's coming in the spring. And as we talked about, we do have our Tates. This is kind of what you see every Easter in the store for, forcing. Something a little different, try the boucle. It's Tate boucle, and now my French is very pathetic, so if I've said that wrong, don't come for me. But this guy is a double Tate. So again, you've got that same 10 to 12 inches height, but you get this beautiful double flower, and this is one of my absolute favorites. I tend to plant it somewhere near the walkway because again, it's not quite as big, and this also will naturalize and spread in your garden. And then you can find really unique ones like this Original Poet, which has almost like a pheasant eye in the center, and there actually is another daffodil called Pheasant Eye, which is somewhat similar. But again, this is a beautiful, very fragrant, really cool daffodil. So don't be afraid to look for some more unique varieties, but again, the tried and true Dutch Master is always the way to go. Another popular bulb is going to be hyacinths. Hyacinths are something that people definitely, I think, do for fragrance and for cutting. Hyacinths smell absolutely dreamy. They don't spread as quickly, so don't count on this bulb to be something that's going to be putting out big clumps for you. But it is a good perennial bulb. The deer don't tend to like them, so this is another good one to put in for getting some good fragrance and basically just some bright color in corners or sections of your garden. What I like to do is I like to dig holes and I like to plant my daffodils, and then I put a few hyacinths around it, and we're going to talk about that in another video when we talk about lasagna planting with bulbs, so stay tuned for that. Another favorite, of course, is some of the earlier blooming bulbs. For that, you're going to be looking at crocus. Now, a lot of us love the crocus, but again, it's something you see all the time. So if you're looking to get a little bit unique, you can look at some of our dwarf iris. The dwarf iris will come in mixed colors, and also you can get it in like a beautiful straight blue. And this is like a sapphire blue. This is absolutely stunning. So again, some of these smaller bulbs, you can see they're smaller, so they won't need to be quite as deeply planted, and they're great to kind of naturalize around trees. This again is a bulb that will keep coming back year after year. You don't have to do anything other than cut it down once it's done blooming and is yellowed back. That also brings us to grape hyacinths. Most people are familiar with the blues, the purples, and the very classic ones. I love those, it's one of my favorites, but you can also get whites, pinks, and yellows, so you can make it work with all of your color scheme. So again, this year for me, I'm doing the oranges and the yellows, and I'm gonna be tying in the white grape hyacinths and a bright yellow daffodil so that I have a whole spring full of color. One thing neat about grape hyacinths is they actually send their leaves up in the fall and they bloom in the spring. So a lot of times I will plant a few grape hyacinths when I put new bulbs in, because those leaves come up in the fall. So the next season I can tell where I've planted bulbs already. And it's a great way to naturally mark in the garden so I don't dig up bulbs that I've already planted in past years. The other early spring blooming is going to be a snowdrop. Now in our area, Grand Rapids, Michigan, we don't always see our snowdrops. They're actually sometimes blooming underneath the snow. So I tend to put these somewhere where it's very warm near the house, or somewhere where I don't get as much snow, so I get to actually see them in very early spring. I love snowdrops, but because I don't see them very often, I have started planting this bulb, which is called leucojum. Now leucojum is taller, and as you can tell by bulb size, because the bigger the bulb, the bigger the flower, as you can tell by bulb size, this actually gets a bigger flower to it. And you really want to check this one out, because when you get a close-up look of it, it actually has this little bell-like flower with little green dots all around the petals, and it's absolutely stunning. And this also is a great naturalizing, wonderful to grow into any perennial garden. It can handle a little bit more shade, and is much like a daffodil in the way it functions and the way it grows. Last but not least, I wanted to touch base on some of the real popular allium bulbs. Now, allium bulbs are in the onion family, and what allium basically does is they bloom a little later in the spring. In fact, sometimes they call them early summer. For me, most of the time they're blooming in May and sometimes going into early June. They come in so many different heights and flower sizes. So the main key is going to be to look in the corner of the package to see what the flower size is. One of the most common is this gladiator, which has a flower size of 7 to 8 inches. Now the flower will actually be a very compact 7 to 8 inch flower, and the stem on this will grow up close to 32 to 36 inches. So you can see it's going to be a taller one with a very firm flower. The foliage on this is nothing to write home about, so you're going to want to probably plant it. I usually do it in with ornamental grasses so that the grasses will come and hide it afterwards, but I love to have that purple cool flower kind of flowing in the shorter grasses. My other favorite is Christophii, which this guy is like out of this world. So this flower head gets 8 to 12 inches big. So we're talking about a big, big flower head, and it's almost like stars shooting out. This thing is so cool. And in most packages, you're gonna get multiples. So I tend to place them in a big hole, about 3 of them, and I put them about a foot apart, so I get a giant cluster of these. And again, this thing is so cool because as it finishes blooming, it will actually dry on the stem. So many times I'll let these completely dry, and then I'll use them for decoration in wreaths and in Christmas trees. And you can even spray paint them if you want. Basically like a gold, silver, or something to kind of make it pop. And these are like beautiful stars in a Christmas tree. So don't forget to look at some of these alliums. I do recommend getting alliums in the garden as soon as possible. So most of the time we'll start having those planted in September, but you can plant them pretty late like all the other bulbs. Most other bulbs in our area, you're gonna wanna plant them, anytime the end of September all the way through October. Sometimes I'll even get them in November, but the key, if you really wanna do well, is to plant them this month. So this is bulb time. I hope that gives you an idea of how exciting bulbs can be and all the different things you can do with them. And like I said, stay tuned because we're gonna have a fun little video about how you can layer your bulbs, especially for those of you who have smaller spaces or don't wanna put quite as many bulbs in. So we're gonna do what I call lasagna planting or bouquet planting, and we're gonna take all of these and end up being able to put them in one hole. So I hope you come back for that. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great fall and happy bulb planting.